Hello, friends. I'm here today to speak with you all about the presidential election of 1876. The Democrats did a perfectly solid job when they selected New York Governor Samuel Tilden. Now, the Republican Party, for their part, eventually, after a lot of back and forth, decided on the nomination of Ohio Governor Rutherford Rutherford B. Hayes. And the two squared off in 1876 in what is, sincerely, the most extensively participated in a presidential election in American history. More eligible voters cast ballots in 1876 than in any presidential contest before or since. More than 82% of the eligible voters legitimately cast ballots in that year's election. And legitimacy is going to be a bit of an issue in just a moment. But it was a big contest, one that many people cared deeply about, and one that got a substantial amount of voter turnout. What ends up happening in 1876 is unusual in presidential history in the United States for a number of reasons. Most notable to me, however, is the fact that the election breeds rampant and credible accusations of voter fraud, electoral tampering, and outright corruption with the intent of stealing or swaying the election. These are things that, I need to be clear, do not happen frequently in the United States, even at the state or local level outside of the Southeast in the 1800s, and certainly not in the modern era. The United States democracy is fairly well known internationally for the integrity of its elections. So, what led to these widespread accusations of corruption? Let's start with the Southeast once again. While Samuel Tilden's campaign was not in the least based on the support for the old Southern order or white supremacy, it was supported extensively by old Democratic leaders throughout the Southeast who wanted an end to Reconstruction policies and the freedom for minority political factions like the remnants of the Ku Klux Klan and the Red Shirts to install white supremacist governments and roll back many changes introduced by the more populist governments that took over many of the states following the Civil War, made up of and supported by African-American freedmen and poor whites in many cases. And so it was that these groups, these renegade political factions, the remnants of the Klan, the Red Shirts, and other white supremacist domestic terror organizations used threats and acts of violence and other forms of coercion to convince people not to cast ballots, or worked with allies in law enforcement and local government to throw out large amounts of legitimate ballots or otherwise change the candidate that they were to be directed towards. In fact, accusations of fraud in the Southeast were so widespread that 3 states, Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina, were made the subject of federal investigations in the 1876 election. And it's not hard to see why. South Carolina, for instance, was so brazen with its, shall we say, manipulation of vote totals that it recorded a 101% voter turnout in that election. That's right, more people casting ballots than there were eligible voters in the entire state. Oregon was also the center of some controversy, as its state's population voted for Rutherford B. Hayes, but one of the state's electors was a public official serving as a postmaster while also serving on the Electoral College. And that's something you cannot do in the United States. You can't be an elected or appointed official and also an elector at the same time. You can be one or the other, not both. So that elector was tossed out, and the state's Democratic governor was able to appoint a pro-Tilden elector in his place.